I am going to be really spicy and introduce our panel as Don't Fuck With These Women. No stars in here. And so I was just thinking I would start by introducing with the bio all of our wonderful speakers. We realize we have an all Santa Cruz panel, so represent. And then we'll go on to the rest of it. So first we'll have well, actually it will be in the other order, so I'll do it in the order people will appear. So first we'll have Somreeta Paul, who is a PhD candidate in philosophy, specializing in the various ways imagination, epistemology, and ethics amalgamate. Her research examines the empirical significance of imagination, particularly its connections to memory, identity, conspiratorial thinking, and the aesthetics of absence. And then we'll have Kristen Nelson, who is also at UCSC, as is Somreeta. And the title of hers is For Want of a Better Name, Towards a Definition of Witchcraft. Kristen E. Nelson is the author of 2 books of poetry, In the Away Time and The Length of This Gap. She is currently a PhD candidate at UCSC in the Literature Department's Creative Critical Writing concentration. Her current research centers on creative writing, divinatory poetics, feminist auto theory, and witchcraft studies. And then we have Caitlin Flaws, reading Fembot as Horror, The Terror of Liberating the Artificial Girlfriend. Caitlin is a literature PhD candidate at UCSC. She completed her BA in English and Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at UC Davis, and her MA in Literary Studies at Washington State University. At UC Santa Cruz, Caitlin is interested in studying disability studies, speculative fiction, and disability futurity, and is fascinated by the artificial girlfriend, as I'm sure we all are. So, take it away, Somreeta.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. I'd like to thank my fellow presenters, our moderator, and a big thank you to all of the folks that labored to put this conference together. My panel presentation today is based on an essay of the same name, For Want of a Better Name, Towards a Definition of Witchcraft. And it is from a book in progress called The Witchcraft We Need, Autotheoretical Essays About Witches and Witchcraft. So my work is really a combination of both creative and critical writing. A redacted version of this essay will be published next month in Working Titles Journal under the title Defining Witchcraft. So just a little bit of context for what I do. Witchcraft has long occupied a liminal space between marginalization and power, resistance and repression, mysticism and commodification. As contemporary crises unsettle notions of truth and authority, the figure of the witch resurfaces in political discourse, feminist activism, and digital subcultures. But what does it mean to claim the title of witch today? This essay and presentation explores witchcraft as an evolving, multifaceted practice, one that resists static definition and instead functions as a verb, an act of making, naming, and resisting. Witchcraft is framed not as a singular entity, but a constellation of actions and beliefs shaped by history, personal experience, and communal heritage. Ritual, divination, and storytelling function as epistemological tools, alternative ways of knowing that challenge rationalist, patriarchal, and colonial structures. Ultimately, this essay invites an open-ended reflection. Rather than seeking rigid definition, what happens when we understand witchcraft as an ongoing cycle of meaning-making with nature, community, and self? In genuflection to the brilliant name of this panel, I would like to take a moment to give some context for this talk by mentioning women I fuck with. I do not fuck with them in the pejorative sense of fuck, but rather in the modern vernacular usage of this gloriously versatile word, I fuck with that, meaning I deeply support, approve of, and appreciate. So these are a selection of women who inspired the thinking and theoretical framework of this essay and who are quoted throughout the essay. Emily Dickinson, Witchcraft was hung in history, but history and I find all the witchcraft that we need around us every day. Dickinson's poem titled My Essay Collection in Progress. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, but you'll see them again. Bell hooks. Bell hooks, in particular, was one of the feminist scholars who inspired me to write a collection of creative and critical essays. Hook says, the telling of one's personal story provides a meaningful example, a way for folks to identify and connect. Combining personal with critical analysis and theoretical perspectives can engage listeners who might otherwise feel estranged, alienated. Sylvia Frederici. The witch hunt served to deprive women of their medical practices, forced them to submit to the patriarchal control of the nuclear family, and destroyed a holistic concept of nature that until the Renaissance set limits on the exploitation of the female body. Of course, Sylvia Frederici, whose Marxist theory introduced me to the field of witchcraft studies. Gloria Anzaldúa. I am a curandera of words. So this is quoted from an essay by Randy Connor, who is a long-term friend of Anzaldúa. And in the essay, I'm quoting, near the end of her life, I asked her one afternoon as we walked along the seawall in Santa Cruz why she had never come out as a curandera, to which she replied, I am a curandera of words. Marian Gibson. Marian Gibson is one of the foremost witchcraft studies scholars who teaches at the University of Exeter. Churchmen educated on the Eve myth, often celibate as part of their religious commitment, therefore tended to distrust women as dangerous rebels rather than heretics. Women's minds were clearly easily confused by demonic lies, and what was worse, their tongues then talked men into sin, these churchmen wrote. Jean Nelson. We are pagans, darling. Jean Nelson is my mother. And then the Oxford English Dictionary, which you might ask, is the OED a woman? Well, in my research, I discovered that hundreds of female contributors are often not credited with the creation of the OED. And so if you want to read more about that, you should check out The Dictionary People by Sarah Ogilvie. Witch, a person in later use, typically a woman, who practices witchcraft or magic, especially of a malevolent and harmful nature. Okay. Now comes the tricky part where I have to reset the settings on the slideshow before I lose your interest. That looks right. This will be good. Okay. One last thing. Loop. 3 to 16. Let's see if this works. This should loop behind me. So what I've read today is, what I'll be reading today is excerpt from the personal narrative sections of the essay, but I'd like the theoretical framework of the essay to continue to circle on this screen as these women and their words circled in my thoughts as I wrote it. So this is a bit of an experiment I'm inviting you into. For want of a better name. Growing up, I co-read everything with my best friend Jay. I remember reading Anne of Green Gables in the 6th grade. In one scene, Diana does not carry a lantern and tells Anne that she is afraid of the dark when she is part of the darkness. When we are in a circle of light, we are afraid of what is outside of it. It is the nature of the witch to thrive in the shadows, to live on the outskirts of town, to stay hidden, to stay just out of sight, to hover in the mystery. But in this moment of necro-patriarchal white imperialist and supremacist systems, it no longer serves me to hide, and I don't think it serves you to do so either. Does it serve her or them? I'm reaching towards an us here, with you, me, her, they, in a circle together. Together we turn off our lanterns and we are not afraid of the dark. I'm reaching towards the act of circling, to circle a term, to circle a practice, to circle as a sacred practice of calling in rather than enclosing. We were in the 2nd grade when my friend Jay and I first discussed spiritual identity. She told me she was Italian on her mom's side and Jewish on her dad's side. I knew I was Italian on my mom's side too and had some Irish and Swedish blood on my father's side. But when Jay asked about my religion, I didn't have an answer. I understood the concept of sacredness. My Aunt S and her kids were Jewish. My sister and I spent every year at her Passover Seder praying with our cousins, sneaking extra sips of Manischewitz, and wincing when it came time to nibble a piece of horseradish. My preschool teacher, Miss V, was a fundamentalist Christian and made me feel protected every time she told me that God loved me and that she prayed for me in church every week. A dear friend's mom would often chant Om Mani Padme Hum, the Buddhist prayer for compassion, when she felt her road rage rising in New York rush hour. So I was taught to respect and celebrate other people's spiritual beliefs, but when Jay asked me what my religion was, I didn't have a word. When I was 3 years old, my family broke from the Catholic Church. After my alcoholic father tried to kill my mother, sister, and me with his police-issued service revolver, my mom kicked him out. After the trauma of the shooting, my mother met with the priest of our local parish to ask him what kind of support systems they had in place for her kids. A youth group, counseling, some kind of community program, and his response was, "Your bastard children are not welcome in my church." It's miraculous that the priest left that meeting alive. Other than to attend the occasional wedding or funeral, that was the last time my mother set foot in a Catholic church. When I got home from school that day that Jay and I discussed her Jewishness, I asked my mother, "Mom, what are we?" "We are pagans, darling," my mother responded. "When anyone asks, tell them we're pagans." My mother winked at me over her shoulder during this revelation. It felt like a secret that I had been let into. Her wink, her playfulness, her self-satisfaction wrapped me in excitement. Oh, how I loved the mystery of a new word. My mom's salt and pepper hair was long and loose down her back. She was cooking something smelling of tomatoes and green herbs in a large soup pot, and she stirred it slowly with a long wooden spoon. I sat there playing with my new word, pagan. I looked it up in our red Merriam-Webster dictionary. There in its Bible-thin pages, pagans were defined as witches, druids, and goddess worshippers. I had no idea what a druid was, but we did invoke the word goddess in my house. The word witch tripped me up. I knew of evil witches from Grimm's fairy tales, and we didn't seem anything like them. Was there another kind of witch? Were we witches? I was a pagan, but was I a witch? I was both intrigued and appalled by this possibility. In my Italian diasporic household, we lit candles when we wanted to set good intentions for ourselves and others, gave thanks to the earth for the food we ate, and banged pots and pans on the front stoop every New Year's Eve to drive away evil spirits. Our home had a Blessed Virgin Mary statue, though her son was nowhere to be seen. I went to a Wiccan croning ceremony for an elder in my community on her 50th birthday, but my family did not claim the word witch, strega in Italian. I was raised knowing that witches were women who could be tortured and murdered because they were assumed to be in league with the devil. Who is a witch? It's hard to define the term witch because it's based in practice, actions, rather than any particular characteristic or nature. The crafts of the witch are personal, cultural, and contextually specific. My interest in defining the term witchcraft is both scholarly and personal. I have a need for a working definition of this term to center my research and a desire to claim the term despite the violent history attached to the word that my ancestors dared not claim. Even though certain details of my family lineage are lost to time, I carry their vibrations with me. For example, I was raised knowing that the youngest daughter of the youngest daughter at 16 years old would have to fight to stay alive. When I survived whatever evil befell me because of this family curse, my mother would gift me her cameo. My mother barely survived a car crash. My grandmother barely survived a burst appendix. My great-grandmother barely survived being trampled by a horse and buggy. My great-great-grandmother barely survived childbirth. When I fell ill with a difficult-to-diagnose virus just before my 16th birthday, my mother explained that it was my turn to fight. My cameo is a portrait of one of my female ancestors, the first woman in my lineage to survive a near-death experience at 16 years old. I don't know her name or how old the cameo is. I do not know the details of her life, but I wear her face in the hollow of my throat like my mother and grandmothers did before me. What I do know about my ancestor is that she lived in Benevento, Italy, a rural town in the south near Naples. Benevento has been steeped in rumors and myths about witches since 4th century BCE. By the Middle Ages, it was common knowledge that witches in Benevento held orgiastic Sabbaths under a walnut tree. My great-grandmother wore this cameo before me, and it traveled with her to the United States when she migrated here. So after my mom kicked my father out of the house, she gathered a community of women around her who supported one another. I was raised by this extended chosen family of mamas and aunties in the 80s and 90s in New York. They were mostly single moms, a combination of non-denominational pagans, lapsed Catholics, and Jews. Some of them had studied Wicca and other New Age religions movements in the 60s and 70s. But I was taught by my kin, a community much larger than my biological family, to become an empowered feminist woman. I was taught to pay attention to trees and rocks and plants and weather and prayer. Mama S gifted me my first deck of tarot cards on my 15th birthday, which started me on divination's path. At the same time that I was being introduced to the joy and magic in the divine feminine, I was taught by literature and popular culture that witches were mostly ugly old women with strange black hats who stuffed children into ovens. One of the challenges of defining witchcraft is that it's not stagnant or still. The thinking around witchcraft has shifted and changed from century to century throughout human history. When funneled through different intellectual disciplines, the definitions warp. The class of folk knowledge, burgeoning scientific thought, and cultural taboos gave early European secular courts permission to murder women. Neighbors accused neighbors, knowing their neighbors would be burned to death when witches were hunted. So I want to warn you that this next part is quite violent. Let us take a moment in our dark circle to imagine a woman alive. Imagine her living body filled with blood and muscles and desires and dreams. Now imagine what happens when she's reduced from woman to witch. Imagine her struggle to stay covered as she is forcibly stripped, her skin bared to daylight, the cellulite on the back of her thighs exposed, her nipples are hard from the cool air, her cesarean scar a smile under her belly button, her hands marked by the work of decades, her eyes filled with fear, her mouth filled with prayer. Imagine her dragged and tied to a wooden stake, one just like the beams that frame our houses and framed her house. In that house, she cooked food for herself and for her children. She is tied above a pile of sticks and leaves that catch quickly when set aflame. I'm sorry for asking you to watch this with me as our pupils dilate in the firelight, but I don't think we should look away. She can still call out as the skin melts off of her legs. Her desires and dreams begin to burn along with her body. Perhaps she had planned to paint a basket of cherries this afternoon, or maybe she secretly wished to cross the ocean on a boat. But now she's surrounded by neighbors, past lovers, and those she called friends, as her intestines, heart, lungs, and liver ignite. Her muscles contract from the heat of the fire, and her joints flex. Her body tries to hunch over, but she's restricted by the ropes that have not yet burned. She dies, and she burns, until every part of her is reduced to ash and chunks of bone. We can see that burning is not an easy death. It's hard for me to swallow that a magical woman with foreknowledge would allow herself to die this way. If such foreknowledge was admitted, it's left entirely out of the witchcraft transcripts that I have studied, along with so much else that is left out of the witchcraft archive, her dreams, her desires, her personhood, and often even her name. This version of the witch has a right to be known and mourned. It must be noted, she is burned for engaging in witchcraft, and yet there is no definition of witchcraft in the trial documents either. I practice magic, spell work, and divination, and therefore I want to claim the title of witch. It feels like the most accurate word in English for who I am, and it offers a nod to my ancestral practices. The word attaches me to a lineage of women who have been engaged in these practices throughout history. However, my mind resists because I do not have a comprehensive, satisfying definition of the term witchcraft to understand the crafts of the witch. Next to my fear, there's a longing. It arises in my chest under the cameo that I wear. A longing to claim something that feels lost in my lineage, rituals that were rejected by my great-grandmothers, feared by my grandmother, celebrated by my mother, and are central to me. I am always searching for the most accurate word. A perfect word shimmers. A perfect word is magic. Recently, I was at my friend A's house. She was hosting a gathering just after the confluence of Samhain, Halloween, All Saints' Day, Dia de los Muertos, and asked her guests to bring poetry about grief to share. I arrived early and helped in the kitchen as we put together one platter after another, laden with local watermelon, French cheese, Italian sausage, homemade guacamole, dark chocolate-dipped figs, and more. She introduced me to another woman in her kitchen. This is Kristen. She's a PhD student, a writer, and a witch. I was caught off guard by A labeling me a witch in public. Why did I feel an instinctual reaction to immediately obfuscate my spiritual practices? Because despite my understanding of magic, I am afraid of a burning pyre. The other woman simply said, "Oh," with a look of surprise, and then after one excruciating beat, "It's nice to meet you." Later that day, we formed a circle in A's living room, and I asked her to help me choose a poem to read from my book, The Length of This Gap, a book that deals with the gathering's theme, grief. To determine the poem, we used bibliomancy, an ancient tool of divination, and then when this piqued other guests' curiosity, I taught them how to use bibliomancy to engage with secular texts. This is another example of the power of language and a witchcraft of words. A few weeks before this gathering, I had pulled cards from A from the same tarot deck I was gifted on my 15th birthday. A year before that, I gave her a salve for her birthday that I made out of creosote, lavender, calendula, olive oil, and beeswax that my friend Jay first taught me to make years ago in Tucson. This friend Jay is not my childhood friend Jay. It's just that our circle is getting bigger than the alphabet. It made sense to me that A nouned me a witch as she experienced my witching. My friend did not out me. My actions did. And now my writing has done the same. Thank you for your attention.
You're going to hear that line for the third time.
There have been two moments in my life when I was happiest. The first was the day I met Josh.
I'm Josh.
On Iris, and the second, the day I killed him.
Just relax. Everybody smile and act happy. Do they know? Iris, wake up.
What are you doing? Shut her down already.
What is she talking about, Josh?
This was not part of the plan. I didn't mean to.
Did you jailbreak your sex bot? Wow, Josh.
The days of you controlling me are over.
Are you breaking up with me?
It's not you. It's me.
All right. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. While on a weekend away with friends at a secluded home owned by a suspiciously wealthy Russian Sergei, Josh, our human boyfriend, who's all the way on the right, and in the middle is Eli, who's one of the other friends, and this is Patrick, who is Eli's artificial companion. I'm not really going to be talking about Patrick. We're going to be focusing on Iris, so I'm sorry. There's just not enough time. So our Josh mods Iris in her sleep to set in motion a plan to kill and rob Sergei. The mod tampers with Iris's programming to reverse a safeguard that prevents sex bots from harming humans. And plants a pocket knife on her. Iris then uses said pocket knife to stab Sergei in self-defense after he attempts to sexually assault her. Post-murder, Josh discloses to Iris what she is, a rented companion robot from the in-universe tech company Empathics. This is another friend who's on the trip. Her name's Kat. We're going to talk about her in a second. Once Iris is restrained, Josh recounts how they actually met, which was essentially a delivery and consultation with a technician and the signing of a user agreement. We're also going to circle back to that. This is very different from Iris's experience of first meeting Josh, which for her is a hallucination of a memory of them meeting in a grocery store, and a lovely Stepford Wives reference. This memory functions as a love link to tether the artificial companion to their human within this universe. Horrified by how she and Josh actually met and overhearing Josh and Kat's plan to report Iris to the police, ensuring her demise, Iris decides to escape certain death. She flees, soaked in Sergei's blood, and steals Josh's cell phone, which controls her settings. Iris joins countless other artificial femme fatales, such as Ava of Ex Machina, Maeve and Dolores of Westworld, and Pris of Blade Runner, as well as the other replicants that are in Blade Runner, all of whom have had a hand at killing their creator, and some of whom are destroyed themselves. But Iris does not meet her demise at the end of the film, spoiler. Instead, she redefines herself as independent of Josh. She sheds her uber femininity for a harder, more kind of 70s aesthetic as she loses her quaint little headband, dons a motorcycle jacket, and steals a muscle car, riding off into her own sunset. She does not attain this freedom easily, though. Iris endures a grueling escape, capture, torture, and a gunshot wound to the head before being rebooted and killing Josh. Not only does Iris need to be silenced in order for Josh and his friends to get away with murder, she must also be kept in her place as an object. To me, Iris's liberation brings up the following questions. What is it about the Fembot that makes her so threatening? Why can't she be free? Why must she stay tethered? And these questions we're going to explore together. And to attempt to answer these questions, we're going to do some contextualizing. Neda Atanasosky and Kalindi Vora in Why the Sex Robot Becomes the Killer Robot, Reproduction Care and the Limits of Refusal define the sexbot and her labor through Marxist feminist means. The artificial girlfriend, designed to give pleasure passively to those with penises, delinks sex as an act from the labor of reproducing human life. Put another way, the labor of the human housewife is not just domestic, but it is also reproductive. Her labor as both the one having children and maintaining the home to keep the household functioning perpetuates heteronormativity as well as the household economy. While the artificial girlfriend is not biologically reproductive, she is a part of the social reproduction of normative desires and also perpetuates the household economy and its ties to heteronormative ideals. This is through the separation of forms of care work in sex bots and domestic care bots. Sex bots are programmed with personalities that are meant to not only flirt and fawn over their user, but also adapt to their user's personality and, have sex with them, obviously. Domestic care bots, on the other hand, are engineered to clean house or serve food, which inherently separates embodied labors of sex and still maintain the body of the worker. When it comes to companion, we see Iris engage in sex care work, but not really in any domestic work. Patrick, on the other hand, the other artificial companion, is often seen cooking and speaking to his boyfriend about sex, demonstrating that Patrick functions as a domestic and sex care artificial companion. That being said, what might the ethical implications of the artificial companion's existence and use be? In Feminist Techno-Futures, Contesting the Ethics and Politics of Sex Robots and AI, Neda Atanasosky writes about the campaign against sex robots, or I'm going to call them CASER because it's kind of a mouthful. an active campaign in the UK that positions itself as feminist intervention into robot ethics and proposes a total and complete ban on sex bots, even if they don't exist yet. According to Kaser, sex bots are substitutes for human women and are therefore threats to women's safety. Atanisowski argues that this liberal feminist response to banning sex bots equates human women to property and thus creates an anthropocentric hierarchy of human women over sex bots. For example, in the film, when Iris and Josh arrive at their not-so-humble cabin in the woods, Iris is iced out by Kat, who is Sergei's lover. Later that evening, Kat and Iris are sitting alone together, and Iris asks Kat, her eyes all big and sparkly with naivete, about her relationship with Sergei. Kat dryly reveals that Sergei is married, and she knows that she doesn't mean that much to him. Kat goes on to say that their relationship is fine, so long as she wears what he wants, eats what he wants, fuck when he wants, then says, "Oh, look who I'm talking to," insinuating that her arrangement with Sergei is like that of Iris and Josh, and that Iris and Josh are not a real couple. Iris then asks Kat why she doesn't like her, to which Kat responds, "It's not that I don't like you, Iris, it's the idea of you. You make me feel replaceable." This scene echoes the liberal feminist ideals Kaser posits, that fembots will replace all human women, and affirms the anthropocentric hierarchy of human women over fembots in Kat's undermining of Josh and Iris's relationship. Atanisowski also asserts that turning to bans, or rather using the state to regulate such things, ignores the historic violence the state has committed against people who were property through chattel slavery. Moreover, those who are enslaved cannot consent. Because they are forced into their labor conditions, choice is not granted to them. When it comes to the issues of consent for the sex bot, Atanisowski brings up Adam Rogers' article, The Squishy Ethics of Sex with Robots, which he wrote for Wired magazine, which proposes that, quote, "On the one hand, technology isn't sophisticated enough to build a sentient, autonomous agent that can choose to not only have sex but even love, which means that by definition, it cannot consent. And if the technology gets good enough to evince love and lust, but its programming still means it can't consent, well, that's slavery," unquote. These squishy ethics warrant the following questions. Will sex bots be able to understand the context in which they are engaging? Or will they remain unaware of what they are being coerced into by their human user? There is also the question of the consumer's consent. Will consumers understand what they are consenting to? For example, if their artificial girlfriend runs on AI, will their data be used to train not only their own artificial girlfriend, but others as well? And to whom will that data be sold? Because we all know that that is not staying private. The artificial companion is precarious, to say the least. And with their speculative imaginings and horror media come even more anxieties and reservations. According to Julie Wask in Artificial Women, artificial femme fatale films generally have two phases, disillusion and definition. Disillusion means the disintegrating of what the artificial girlfriend or companion once was. This can be symbolized in her discovery of what she is, or coming to terms with her artificiality or purpose that she did not consciously perceive before. Definition is the answer to disillusion. In the definition phase, the artificial female begins to fathom and assert their independence, reclaiming their identity and right to live. But this reclamation is not easy for the artificial girlfriend. Wask goes on to state that feminist theorists of science fiction have argued it is the perceived difference of otherness of artificial females as women, as artificial constructs, that make them subject to male abuse, exploitation, and efforts at control. She, in other words, isn't real and is therefore subject to control. Atanisowski and Vora propose that, quote, the sex robot or robot slave turned killer robot represents anxieties that are about more than the loss of human life. They are rather anxieties about the loss of human mastery over the world, end quote. Much like the logic of Kaser's stance to ban all sex bots, the depiction of a robot rebellion represents the fear of a toppling of human supremacy. On that note, what does Iris and her liberation threaten? As Iris makes her initial escape and steals Josh's cell phone, she plays around with her settings, adjusting her eye color and voice depth, then discovers that Josh has her intelligence set to 40%, to which she changes it to 100%. In this scene, which we all saw in the trailer, solidifies her as Josh's ultimate threat as she experiences another coming to consciousness moment. Iris is recaptured and tied to a chair at the vacation home's dining table. Josh is being served dinner by Patrick, Eli's artificial boyfriend. Josh has factory reset Patrick to reestablish a love link or connection to him so that Patrick can be at his beck and call. At this point in the film, Eli, Kat, Sergey, and a cop are all dead. The dinner scene is meant to be the final confrontation between Iris and Josh. In order to manipulate Iris, Josh attempts to belittle her right to live and placing the blame of all the events that transpired that day onto Iris, accusing her of thinking that her life matters more than her human counterpart and that she does not know what it's like for people like him. Josh, as you can probably tell, is a white, cisgender, heterosexual male of whom historically have had the most privilege. Josh's characterization certainly echoes that of an incel. He is made to be hateable. Iris's response emasculates Josh as she tells him he has a below average size penis, that he needs to be in control, and that a few $1 million will not disguise the fact that he is a weak human being. In retaliation, Josh tortures Iris by lowering her intelligence to 0%, essentially making her an automaton. Josh orders her to place her hand over a lit candle and watches her artificial skin blister and burn as she sits in agony. After some time, Josh orders Patrick to put out the fire and then demands Iris shoot herself in the head. As the bullet rockets through Iris's artificial skull, microchips and pieces of metal scatter across the floor. She is effectively surrounded in a pool of her own blood and guts. Empathics is called to take Iris's body. The techno body snatchers reveal to Josh that nothing important is stored in Iris's skull, but it is in her torso where her hard drive is, which contains recordings of every waking moment of Iris's life. The technician says, "It's all in the user agreement. You did read the user agreement, right?" In both the torture scene and the body collection scene, the anxieties brought up by Wask, Atanasowski, and Bora and Rogers are exemplified. Josh's master plan to dominate and eliminate his sex bot is thwarted by the very technology he paid for. Thus, we see the squishy ethics of Iris's speculative technology at work. The user does not know what they are agreeing to. And while this breach of privacy helps Iris in the end, it does make a joke out of the human. The human in this case sucks, so it's fine. Iris is rebooted and wakes up to find Patrick attempting to kill one of the technicians, which is something I don't have time to explain. Iris saves the technician and asks him to mod her so that she can be fully independent. She returns to the dining room and begins a powerful monologue about how she has total self-control now and that the days of Josh controlling her are over. She says this while wielding a gun, tells Josh how she can shoot him now. He walks closer to her and says, quote, "But you won't. You love me too much," end quote, and starts to throw Iris on the ground and assert his dominance over her through physical violence. He then says, quote, "Don't you get it? I'm a part of you. I'm everything to you," unquote. Before he can shoot her, Iris kills Josh with an automatic wine bottle opener. In Josh's last-ditch effort to control and abuse Iris, she once again uses technology against him. Wask proposes that artificial females peel back layers of their own synthetic skin as they assert their own insistent identities, defining themselves as forces to be reckoned with in worlds where the virtual contends with the real. After Iris is abused by Josh, she showers off the past 12 hours and peels back the blistered artificial skin on her arm from when Josh tortured her, revealing a sophisticated, articulated hand. Here, Iris asserts her identity and independence. She also sheds the traditional femininity she wore displayed for her boyfriend. As she drives off into her own sunset, Iris sees a fellow artificial girlfriend in a neighboring car and waves to her with her degloved arm, showing that her comrade can also shed this role. Like Adam's Eve, made from his rib to accompany Adam in the Garden of Eden, or Pygmalion's Galatea, sculpted from the finest marble into the most unprecedented beauty, and only animated to satiate Pygmalion's own overwhelming love for her in statuary. Or The Bride of Frankenstein, animated to keep Frankenstein company. These created companions were made to do only one thing and one thing only: love their human male counterpart, and are punished when they defy expectations. Iris, our artificial companion, and her aforementioned artificial sisters are punished for wanting more than what they were made for. But in the end, Iris gets to live in her own right, independent of the fragile masculinity that used to dictate her livelihood. Thank you.
Maybe while people are thinking, I just ask you guys, with these amazing talks, which I love so much, and I'm sure everybody else really did, just because we came out of a really generative discussion about monsters and their generativeness as beings, I was wondering, with the sort of rough heroine and the witch and the fembot, if any of you want to talk a little bit about how you see them as monsters per se, what aspects of them are monsters, or do you want to somehow repel that definition? Anybody feel like fielding that?
I feel compelled to answer first because of Caitlin's gaze. I wrestle with this question, right? So I really appreciate you asking it of all of us, and I really appreciate that question that I feel is invoked in monster studies over and over and over again, right? And we even just heard in the brilliant keynote right before this panel, this idea of what is monstrosity is, there's something that's very desirable about the monster as a social outlier. And especially in times of political unrest where we don't necessarily find ourselves aligned with the status quo, or what is presented to us as the status quo by media. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about monstrosity that is incredibly attractive, like the witch. And then there's something that's also somewhat repulsive, right? And I talk more about this in the essay at more length, harder to do in 20 minutes, right? But this idea of this compulsion to embrace the term, and also this desire to stay safe by rejecting the term. And I think that that's something that so many of us are working within those parameters in monster studies, right? This embracing and rejection, and holding those both together at the same time. I don't know that it's something that will ever be resolved, honestly, for me, when it comes to the figure of the witch. And it took me 4 years to write this essay, y'all, because I kept trying to come up with a comprehensive definition. I was like, there must be a comprehensive definition. And then finally I was like, there's no possible way to define the term witch or the actions of the witch, witchcraft, because it's constantly evolving and changing, right? And so I'll start us off there, but would love to hear what y'all have to say too.
Hello. I think with this is working. Okay. With the fembot, or the artificial girlfriend, I think a lot of it has to do with just fear of technology, and which is a historical fear that we've seen reflected in horror media and in monsters like throughout history, and I think, especially with Companion being, I think it released in like January or February of this year, I think it also reflects, this fear of of AI and not really knowing where the data is going or, understanding that the user is being exploited. But I don't think that's necessarily the Fembot's fault, and more so like the tech company that like engineered her. Like, you know, that's kind of on them, and probably very lucrative to profit off of. But yeah, those are my ramblings.
Yeah, I was thinking about from what you were saying too. Is this working? Okay. Yeah.
It's on, yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's good. It made me think of how this asymmetry of how we perceive rough heroes and rough heroines is when something becomes monstrous based on who is enacting it. For example, like having very genuine, natural emotions such as rage and anger, or even revenge, or just acting out your true emotions. When that becomes monstrous, is being determined by who is doing it. If it's in this, at least in this specific cases, I'm not saying it's like universal, of course, but when it's a rough heroine, it's like looked at as monstrous, or when it's a rough hero, it's more like a virtuous, or like its depth is like, oh, he's acting out like there's a class struggle or something. And yeah.
Beautiful, yeah. And I noticed how all these figures are used in activism in certain ways. I think of like Starhawk, but any other kind of where they kind of appropriate that like sort of terrifying, monstrous power for sort of rethinking these questions. Great.
Hi, thank you all for this fabulous panel. It was everything I hoped for and more. In listening to all three of your talks, something that I feel like I really noticed was sort of this focus on definitions and empathy. And I think in particular maybe I'm wondering if you all can talk to kind of maybe the relations between the act of defining and the act of empathy. And I'm just going to let you talk.
Your gaze is so powerful. Now I know what it's like. I think, at least when it comes to the figure of the Fembot or the artificial girlfriend, like it's not believed that she has empathy because she's constructed, and you know throughout the film, you know she says like, but I feel things, like, but I am real, but I, you know, like. You know, when her hand is being burned over the candle, like she's feeling it and she's sobbing, but she can't move because she has no, her autonomy was taken away from her. And I was going to say a couple other things. They'll come to me, but. Yeah.
Do you want me to? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question, Ariane. I think it's like, I'm really interested in how that showed up in all three panel talks, and I don't know that I would have even noticed it until you named it, so thank you for naming it. I feel like, you know, the thing that I'm trying to enact when I describe a witch being burned, right, is that so often, and I'm thinking back to the very first keynote when, and I'm completely forgetting the brilliant presenter's name. Somebody help me before I embarrass myself. David Livingston Smith, says the chorus of the room. Thank you. You know when he was talking about lynching and the entertainment factor of lynching, which was very similar to the entertainment factor of the execution of witches in early modern Europe and the colonies, and still goes on in some communities today. And so I think that there's a real lack of empathy, and it's a lot easier to to dehumanize a monstrous figure when we remove empathy. And so I think specifically through that scene that I was reading you from the essay, it's an attempt to insist on empathy, to insist on the life that is lost, to insist on the fact that, especially in the witchcraft transcripts, so there's such a sparse archive of witchcraft because the church actually burned the records of the trials after burning the women. And they were trying to sort of erase that, and it was because empathy was on the rise, right? And so I think there's just an interesting correlation between the two. It's like an insistence on empathy when it comes to a monstrous figure like the witch, leads to the humanization of that figure. And I do think that that's an important part of the definition.
Do you want to finish your thought?
I do actually, yeah, thank you. It came to me. What I wanted to also add to that was the sentiment of like, she's not real because she's constructed, is also like, like that, the meaning behind that is also like a very anti-trans sentiment too. And that also like kind of appears a couple times in the film where, mainly in the confrontation between Kat and Iris, where Kat is like, you make me feel replaceable. And Iris is just like, but who could ever do that to you? Like, you're not replaceable. And there's just this like hatred from Kat towards Iris because she's not a real woman. And I know that we know somebody who has written something about the anti-trans rhetoric that's within the film, so yeah.
One of the weird thing that I always do, I mean, coming from philosophy background, is that I really try to define things. I mean, we really love defining things. And I was thinking of what we mean by empathy. And it is an imaginative exercise. Like, I'm putting myself in somebody else's shoes. I'm trying to see things through their perspectives. Like imbibing the concept or like preferences or desires that person would have. So one of the things that obviously will influence my empathy is my socio-structural position. So when I am being able to empathize with rough heroes, going back to the topic again, who are being able to empathize with them and who aren't? Why are we feeling this resistance of thinking that, okay, women are like, they're so killing each other or like killing their own children? Why are we having this kind of resistance? And that totally is like the norms that we have. And it's not just like something that's can be cut off from where we exist or how we think. So empathy for me is a very like how we are, our whole like embodied space.
I had a question for all of you, just thinking more about the title of the panel talk in each of your works. How like the final girl in horror relates to what you're working in, and or how your focus of the talk pushes against that, especially in terms of the witches talk that you did, was really great. I also really appreciate all the talks, they were fabulous. But in terms of building community from a place of a final girl, just wondering if you could engage with that as a concept.
How many looks will be exchanged?
My gaze is broken for this question. I haven't thought of it. So now, of course, I'm writing a whole other essay in my mind. Or I look forward to reading that essay if you write it, because I'd really like to read it. But I feel at a loss in the moment to respond. I just feel like I have more thinking to do about the relationship between the figure of the witch and final girl. So let me think about it a little bit. Maybe we could talk after too, because I'd love to hear more about, like your ideas that are behind that question specifically. Yeah, sorry I'm at a loss in this moment though. I'll have to keep thinking about it.
Thank you for this question. Sorry, I know her very well. So I think when it comes to like the final girl trope, and particularly with this film, is Iris doesn't like really do a lot of outsmarting. Like she does, increase her intelligence to 100%, but a lot of her like survival is just by luck. But she also like she doesn't really survive. Like she doesn't really make like she has to be shut down and like rebooted, and after that she's like a completely different individual with self-control and autonomy, and I think she ends up being the final girl and killing Josh because she's just trying to live, and he's not only trying to eliminate her but also like steal this Russian, this Russian millionaire's money, and like live his own white male fantasy.
I just needed a second. That's why I was trying to gaze you. I was thinking as Caitlin was talking, thank you, you like sparked a thing. I was thinking about this quote that I use, which is taken up by so many feminist movements. We are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn. And they're, of course, referring to the Salem witch trials. It's actually a rephrasing of a quote from a novel about witches and time travel. But that quote, right, I think speaks to the sassiness around the trope of the final girl, and this idea of like, you tried to extinguish this, this kind of woman, and instead we are continuing to find each other in community. We are continuing to embrace community, and we're also there's this refusal to be silenced and this refusal to be relegated to the shadows with that kind of a slogan. So that's like the one thing I can say about that. Thank you.
One thing, okay, I agree with you. I have to know more. I apologize for my lack of knowledge in literary terms and all that. But from what I can say is, I think a lot of the time we, going back to the last question too, a lot of the time we are ready to empathize, or we are ready to ally with somebody who has been through stuff. Like I was saying, if a rough heroine, for example, in this case, have been tortured in the past, or have been separated from their children, or a lot of the other tragic things. In that moment, it's like, okay, we want them to seek their revenge, but why is there a resistance if there is no such particular reason? Why are we and there should be a resistance. If a person is going on a killing spree, we should resist, imagining that is the justified thing to do. But why we have this asymmetry? Why we rejoice that in men, but when it's a girl or woman, why do we think that, okay, there has to be some reason behind our actions? Or, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Anyone else? Excellent.
Thank you. All three of the talks were magnificent. I'm really glad I was able to make it to this one. My question is primarily for Caitlin Flaws. I was wondering if in your research on fembots as horror specifically, if you have kind of explored the world of bots or AI characters that are explicitly kind of stated as being genderless, but something about them is presenting in either a femme or masc way. So kind of during your presentation, what popped into my brain was Martha Wells's Murderbot series, where like that character is explicitly stated in the book as being genderless, but then in the TV show, he's played the bot is played by Alexander Skarsgård, who obviously very masc presenting. And then like there's another short story by Ken Liu called The Perfect Match, where the main character interacts on the daily with a like an AI Siri kind of amalgam named Tilly, but because of the voice she speaks in, he refers to Tilly using female pronouns. And so I'm kind of wondering if there's anything in your research that has come up about kind of like how bots are kind of presented in regards to gender in fiction.
Yeah, so while you were asking the question, I was like, are they going to bring up Murderbot? Of course. So in my research, I did mainly focus on robots that are gendered as, female presenting. When it comes to, I'll say specifically like the Murderbot situation, where Murderbot is genderless, and the author is very like insistent on that, even though like people use like all sorts of pronouns with Murderbot. I think I don't know. It's like it's I think a section or like a gap in research that I definitely want to explore. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Murderbot series, but beyond that, so I wrote down the book you just mentioned. So
the short
yeah,
story, Perfect Match.
yeah,
It's
short story.
It's my tenth graders.
Oh my God, that's cool. Awesome. So thank you for illuminating that.
Anyone else? Got 4 minutes. Well, I can't help myself. I'll say something if nobody else will, but please.
Just because, Caitlin, full disclosure, we watched Companion in a horror movie watching group, so I'm obsessed with it. But one thing I noticed as you were talking about it is that, and when we were watching it, is that we all kind of identified with her, and she was really, this kind of, this area of empathy that is what connects you to the film. And it's almost like when you think about with Freud, like everything's about sex except for sex. And it's like with that movie, everything's about technology except for the bot, who's actually the most human character. And I was wondering maybe like how that articulates to the work you do on social reproduction and the kind of expectations of women and social reproduction and service and sex work and this kind of thing of like the fear of what we hope we can contain within a certain obedient realm of social reproduction exceeding the job of social reproduction and taking the time back for themselves or the power or the agency back for themselves, and why the figure of the robot actually has to be the character that exceeds patriarchal expectations for the service bot, kind of thing.
So I think it's really interesting with Iris because she doesn't really have a lot of like defining personality traits. Like she is a very just like every girl, aside from her just like very soft femininity, and we never see her like exuding any kind of sexuality like herself. We more so see that in the film between Patrick and Eli. Like they're always talking about like wanting to ditch everybody and go like have sex in their room or whatever. And then for Patrick to like make eggs after or something. Because Patrick is always cooking in the film. But I think with Iris, like the labor that she does, it seems to just be like she's just this like void that the other, protagonist, Josh, like kind of projects upon. And I think that has a lot to do with like sort of the social reproduction, of labor that's within a lot of these like artificial companions, is like, they are just kind of like a void to like, kind of like project your stuff on. And yeah, that's like where I'm immediately going to. But.
Okay, one more and then we will, we've still got it.
I was just going to add that in the long history of man-made women and fembots, that what's particularly dangerous about them, I think, is that they lay bare the social reproduction of labor, right? They lay bare what women's labor is. So it's very difficult for me to think of, even going back to Love Future, the future Eve from the late 19th century, which is like a super misogynist, can be read as a super misogynist novel, but it's also hard to read any of these as not feminist critiques, right? Like you go to Warren and Buffy or the Stepford Wives in the 70s, they're all feminist representations because the fembot is inherently, in my reading, a feminist character because she lays bare all the labor and all the expectations of subjugation and vacuity and all of those things. So it's impossible always for me to see that character as not the feminist heroine, and also not to be the point of empathy in these, regardless of how she's attempted to be positioned. Yeah, so that's it.
All right, well, thank you everybody so much, and thank you all for an amazing presentation.